with Pastor Bart Dilks from the River Life of Pentecostal Church. Pastor, if you'll step forward to the podium, thank you.
Good morning. I thought a few verses might be appropriate for our weather outside. The wind bloweth where it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof, but cannot tell where it cometh from, and whither it goeth, and every one that is born of the Spirit. Another verse says this, He caused the east wind to blow in the heaven, and by his power he brought the south wind. Most of ours is east to west, and we're having a lot of it right now. I heard a man once say, if she's going to blow, she's going to blow. In other words, you can't always control everything that happens in this life. Just stepping outside today would be evidence enough that we cannot stop everything that happens. Surely, I am aware that in governance, that there are going to be times where we feel like we're trying to stop the wind. But we do everything that is humanly possible, and that is my prayer today. So let me pray this simple prayer. Lord, please help us that are here and the council members that are represented to make wise decisions that affect all of the lives of us that live in Doña Ana County. Please give them guidance and wisdom with all that is humanly possible, and for the rest to trust you that is able. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Dilks. Vice Chair Sheldra, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Amanda, would you please do a roll call of the commission members present to determine a quorum?
Commissioner Murillo? Commissioner Reynolds?
Here.
Commissioner Sanchez?
Present.
Vice Chair Shaljo Hernandez?
Present.
And Chair Chaparro.
Present. Thank you. We do have a quorum. The County Commission convenes as the Board of County Commissioners and the County Board of Finance in open session. Mr. Macias, are there any changes to the agenda?
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman. There are no changes to the agenda, and if I can just say Happy Valentine's Day to everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Macias. Happy Valentine's Day to you as well. Mr. Macias, would you please proceed with the pet showcase?
All right, let me start with our dog of the week, this time Max. I'm a sweet and friendly boy who enjoys car rides and walks great on the leash. I also don't mind sleeping in crates overnight. However, in general, I don't like being kenneled or contained for long periods of time, and I'm known to be a bit of an escape artist. So my new family should stay with me on a leash outside until my yard is certifiably escape-proof, just in case. And this, again, is Houdini, the escape artist. Excuse me, his name is Max, and he's available for adoption. And again, for those who may be listening in the audience, the County Commission takes advantage of each of its meetings to promote the adoption of animals from the Animal Services Center of the Mesilla Valley. Our cat of the week is Delilah. I am sleek, elegant, and overall the best kitty ever. I love being chatty and telling you stories and asking you for love and pets. All I want is my forever home with humans that I can love and cherish forever. I promise I'm the sweetest companion that you could ever adopt. Delilah is 1 year old, short hair, a domestic short hair. And then Max, our dog, is 3 years old, and he's the medium-sized animal. Again, we have events, adoption events that are occurring at the farmers market this Saturday from 10 to 1. And then a Loving Forever Association event that began on the 12th and runs through the 18th of February. There's also a drive-through adoption opportunity on the 19th of February from 9 to 2. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Macias. You still sound wonderful, even though you're joining us virtually. We'll move on to public input. Are there any members of the public that would like to step forward and have any comments for the commission? No one? Thank you. Then we'll move forward with staff input. Mr. Macias, do we have any input from the staff?
Madam Chairwoman, I believe that we do not.
Thank you, Mr. Macias. Then we'll move forward with county elected officials' input. Is there any county elected official that would like to move forward to the podium and speak? Hearing none, we'll move forward to commission input. Commissioners, is there anyone that would like to speak at this time?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Sanchez?
Thank you. I just wanted to inform the public, as I know we had a input session yesterday evening in Doña Ana Elementary to discuss the sidewalks and lighting project, the second phase of what we're trying to plan to do within the village of Doña Ana. Appreciate those that came to participate. And I think as we move along with the plan, we'll continue to communicate out with the community, make sure we're getting input, and really appreciate both our engineering department and roads department for working along with the community and trying to get this project going. The other, coming up next week, though, I'm hoping we'll get some good input for a NMDOT meeting. There was an A to B study that was done from Loman to Doña Ana on I-25, and then from the off-ramp of I-25 on Thorpe all the way down to Badella Road. And so they're finally, this has been several years in the works. And so next week, there's going to be two sessions that I'd like to invite the public to participate in. One is on Wednesday, February 22nd. At 6 p.m. It's a virtual meeting that hopefully we'll get some information out to the public on. But that's on Wednesday, February 22nd. The next day, on Thursday, February 23rd at 6 p.m., there will be a hybrid meeting. There will be virtual and there will be in-person. The in-person will be at Doña Ana Elementary. And so for those that would like to participate in person, you can gather there, and they will be taking public input. And I think it's really important to be able to see what the proposed changes or to Thorpe Road as well as I-25, but particularly for the village of Doña Ana, I think it's going to be hopefully a big step in the right direction in trying to address traffic issues. I'm hoping that they'll get the input that they've taken so far with pedestrian access as well along Thorpe. So, but it is important that the public come out and make sure that their voices are heard there again. So again, February 22nd is the virtual meeting. February 23rd will be in person and also at Doña Ana Elementary at 6 p.m. on both days. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanchez. And would you share that link with us for the 22nd?
Yes, and what I was hoping is that we can have our PIO and work on getting the announcements and sharing that information. I know the NMDOT has shared the information out, but I would like to see if our county staff can share that on our socials if we can, so that way, I'm getting a thumbs up back there. Thank you, Corey. So that way we can make sure people are aware of it. I did want to ask, if possible, one other thing, and I don't know how other commissioners feel about this. When we have public meetings that the county is having or county staff, and this will, Mr. Macias, if possible, would it be possible to have the staff send a meeting invite to the relevant commissioner in the district? That way, you know, if we get emails, that's great. Sometimes, though, the emails can get lost in the mix. I know for myself, if it comes across as a meeting invite, then it shows up on my calendar. Even if I haven't accepted it, it'll still show up in my calendar as an event. And I think that would help, at least I know for myself, have the ability to be able to look at my calendar
and understand what public events we may have or maybe hosting as a county in my district. So that would be a big help for me. But like I said, I'll leave it up to the other commissioners if that's something that, get your thoughts on it. But to me, that would be a huge help in trying to make sure that I'm organized and well aware of any events we're having in my district.
No, I think that's a good idea, Commissioner Sanchez, and that would be helpful to me as well. Does any other commissioner have
Madam
any-
Chair,
Yes, Mr. Macias?
yes, that wouldn't be difficult at all. What we would have to do is be given a little bit of direction in terms of the breadth of the meetings that commissioners would be interested in. It's not difficult at all if it's county sponsored, but where we're running into some difficulty, a good example is with our legislative meetings that were set up very quickly and were organized technically by the legislators and their staff in Santa Fe. I think that there was some difficulty in communicating all of those meetings to members of the commission. But if what I'm being asked for is if there is something very specific, a public meeting that we are aware of, be it county sponsored, state sponsored, can it get onto our calendars? We certainly can be doing that.
That's an excellent idea. Thank you so much. Commissioner Reynolds, you raised your hand that you wanted to
Thank you,
make a
Madam.
comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'd like to review a couple of things that I've been doing. Obviously, we've all been doing this, I think. In Santa Fe, I was fortunate enough to attend several events like the New Mexico State Foundation meeting, the Border Industrial Association meeting, and also the Las Cruces Days meeting. And spent a couple of weeks up there, which was very enlightening, and I worked on some legislation to help us down here and met with most of our representatives. In addition to that, I also had the opportunity about 3 weeks ago to go out to White Sands Missile Range and participate in a shovel ceremony for the new microgrid. The microgrid they're putting in is actually being done by a company out of South Carolina, but they're putting in solar panels just in order to ensure that their water wells continue working in case they lose power at the base. So this is just the first step in something they're trying to do in order to harden the base so that if anything happens, they lose power, or they lose any kind of utility, then they can still recover and still maintain the support that they need to have. In addition to that, I also attended the CCDA meeting in Chaparral. That's the first one of this year that I've been able to attend, and they've changed some things out there and some things have happened, but they're still having the meetings on the first Monday of every month if anyone else wants to go out. Something else that everyone knows, or they should know by now, is the work has started on the 404 expansion. The 404 is the highway that goes from Anthony, exit over to Chaparral, and then they're also going to expand War Road all the way down to Texas. So they've been working on the bridge, as everyone knows, for the last 2 years. Now they're moving away from the bridge, and in the last month, surprisingly, they've already gotten almost all the way to the top of the hill, expanding the road, and actually poured quite a bit of blacktop. So it's moving pretty quickly in the last month. I don't know when the project's supposed to be done exactly, but I know that the New Mexico Department of Transportation is running that project, and they have all the funding they need in order to complete the project here on the New Mexico side. That's also supposed to connect up with a Texas DOT intersection that's going to take it over to 375 and provide a bypass around El Paso on the north side. The north side bypass is estimated to save us between 50 and 70 minutes of time getting around El Paso, depending on the traffic and the time of year, time of day. So this is pretty important for New Mexico because it creates a corridor of possible development that we haven't had before going through Chaparral. And the people in Chaparral are looking forward to this. And then the last thing I have is the city is actually trying to rezone some land at the intersection of Telbrook and Los Alturas. There's 12 acres there, and they're trying to zone it C3. In the whole area between University all the way out to about almost a mile past Telbrook, there's nothing but houses out there, family. So it's all it's all single-family houses except for five triplexes, which are all also single-story. If in fact they get to do the rezoning, there's an engineering firm, electrical engineering firm that's going to move in there. They want to put a botanical garden in there, which is kind of a nice thing, but the additional land is going to have open, which is roughly about 5 acres, is going to allow them to put up 60-foot high apartment buildings like we have over at the on the campus on Wisconsin here. So the community, of course, is against it. The Planning and Zoning Commission has already approved it. So the next thing that's going to happen is we're going to have a meeting at City Council. And I'm saying this over in this forum because I want all my constituents to know that anyone who's interested in standing up and having something to say about this should make the next city meeting to protect the citizens of the county. The property also borders the county, so that 12 acres takes them right up to the city line, and everything else out there is county. So for county residents that are care, putting that C3 commercial could be factory, it could be apartment buildings, it could be a cannabis factory, it could be just about anything with the way they're zoning it. So anybody who has an opinion about it should show up at the Las Cruces meeting. I think it's the next one. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Reynolds. Any other input by any other commissioner? Thank you. Then we'll move forward to minutes. May I have a motion to approve and a second to approve the minutes, please?
So move.
Second.
The motion is made by Commissioner Murillo, seconded by Commissioner Sanchez. Any changes to the minutes? Any discussion on the minutes, commissioners? No? Thank you. May I have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Murillo,
Yes.
Commissioner Reynolds,
Yes.
Commissioner Sanchez,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chaljo Hernandez,
Yes.
and Chair Chaparro.
Yes. The motion passes 5-0. Minutes are approved. We will then move on to consent agenda. The board has been asked to approve by one motion the following items of recurring or routine business, items 2 through 13. May I please have a motion and a second to approve consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Reynolds. A second to approve consent agenda?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Murillo. There's been a motion and a second to approve consent agenda. Any discussion? Would any commissioner like to pull any item for separate consideration? None? Samantha, may I please have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Murillo,
Yes.
Commissioner Reynolds,
Yes.
Commissioner Sanchez,
Yes.
Vice Chair Chaljo Hernandez,
Yes.
Chair Chaparro.
Yes. The consent agenda is approved 5-0. Thank you, commissioners. We will move forward now to presentations.
Sorry, Chair, I
Oh,
have.
the resolution numbers,
Yes.
thank you.
Item number 5 has a resolution number 2023-21. Item number 6, 2023-22. And item number 9, 2023-23.
Thank you, Amanda, I appreciate that. We will then move on to presentations and proclamations. Number 14 is the National Incident Management System Training for Elected Officials. Mr. Stephen Lopez, welcome today. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the County Commission. Thank you for providing us with a little bit of time this morning to go over what is kind of a standardized FEMA course that we've customized based on what we expect during a disaster response here in Doña Ana County. This is time for you to hear what we expect from the emergency management side, from elected officials, what your legal responsibilities are during a disaster, and give you a chance to ask us questions, give us direction, and we're really appreciative that we're able to do this in an open meeting because it also allows the public a chance to hear the discussions that go on when we talk about disaster preparedness and response. So with that being said, you should have 3 handouts, commissioners. One is, of course, a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. You already have that electronically, but we wanted to give it to you in writing also in case you wanted to take notes on particular items. We're also providing you with something that's labeled at the top in blue called a reference guide, and that's something that is on cardstock that you can keep with you should something ever happen and you want to go, oh, I don't remember what that training was a couple years ago. That kind of gives you the bullet points of what elected officials' responsibilities are. And I'm sure you all have at least once or twice been asked by the news media to make a comment on something, and disasters always invite that type of inquiry. And so we're providing you with what we've found to be very useful tips for communicating with the news media during a disaster. There's nothing secret about it, so if news members want to see it, they obviously have that chance right now on the screen to see what we're sharing with you. Now, the reason that we're providing this training is not really to help us in the Office of Emergency Management, but it's to help you all for the reasons that you hold your positions. I know you all individually, some more than others, and I know that you, A, did not get into your position because of the high salary, because that does not exist, but instead because you care about people and you want to make this county better. And that's why we're providing this training this morning. We want to make sure you do know that official role you have in a disaster enabled you to act quickly and confidently in decisions that you make, ensure that you're taking the necessary actions to protect the community before a disaster, and help the community recover from a disaster. So I'm going to start off with rhetorical questions here, no need for show of hands, but most of you have probably at some point been in one of the following disasters, whether it's a small level car crash, a fire, a tornado. Yes, we do get tornadoes here in Doña Ana County, a hurricane, and while we don't necessarily get hurricanes here in Doña Ana County, we do get remnants. And some of that can lead to high flood volume, and we actually have sheltered people from Hurricane Katrina here in Doña Ana County. We were one of the smaller, farther out shelters. Everything further out from us was large places like Seattle that had lots of shelter capacity. Flooding, you all know that we certainly do get flooding here in Doña Ana County, and while we do try to mitigate floods, keep things from getting bad, they are still going to be a challenge for us, especially with changes in global climate and weather patterns. We don't get a lot of landslides here, but anybody who saw the news about a month ago knows that we did get some rock slides on the road up to Cloudcroft. So they do have the potential to impact us a little bit. We do get wildfires, and this is actually a picture taken from the Organ Mountains. And the Organ Mountains typically have a fire about every 5 to 7 years. Our last one was in 2013, so we are overdue. Most of the time, these occur on the federal properties of White Sands Missile Range and Fort Bliss and do not endanger our residents, but it is something that we obviously have to plan for because wildfire does not respect a barbed wire fence line. And I know all of you experienced the great toilet paper crisis of 2020 thanks to our COVID pandemic, which just goes to show how a disaster of one type can lead to a disaster of another type. So we're going to talk real quickly about what is a disaster, what is the National Incident Management System, what is the ICS or Incident Command System organization and its features, what are your roles as executive and elected officials, especially as it pertains to what we call the MAC group, and we'll explain that term. Talk about senior leader roles and responsibilities. Those are the roles that the person who you hire, Mr. Macias, the county manager, fills that position. We'll talk about the Emergency Operations Center briefly and what we do in a disaster, as well as a little bit of what OEM does outside of disasters. When we talk about a disaster, it is definitely a term of art, and it is one of those things that we all know when we see it, but it's hard to really define, because depending on your perspective, an incident to us in government may be a disaster for a particular homeowner or family member. So it is that matter of scale, but when we're looking at it and we're defining it as a government, we're looking at, is it affecting a whole community? And that doesn't mean it's necessarily a municipality or the entire county, but is it that community? And we have a lot of communities here in Doña Ana County that are unincorporated. Or is it affecting an entire organizational unit within the county? Is it overwhelming our local resources to where we need outside help? And will there be significant fiscal, legal, or community impacts? One of the things that has been stated now for 20 years, but sometimes the general public doesn't understand it as well. When a disaster happens, it starts and ends with the local government. That's you and us. We might say we'd love to call the state for assistance. The state will not be here for at least hours, in many cases days, and could be even weeks depending on what else is going on. And when we talk about the federal response, the federal government takes even longer to mobilize and to be able to provide assistance unless it's something that's predictable to where they've been able to pre-stage resources like a large hurricane coming in, where declarations are made in advance of the actual disaster impact and they're able to get resources on the ground. But even with that, hurricane that hit last year, most of the people that were in that impact zone still have no housing. Many are still living in their cars and in their tents, even though FEMA has approved disaster housing for them, and it's 5 months after that hurricane hit, which goes to show really it's the local people that make that big impact for us. And while we like to say the government's here to help, we really point out that bottom line. It's not just us at the governmental level. Individuals and households help each other. The private sector has a huge role in this, and our non-governmental organizations play a large role, including our faith-based community. So the National Incident Management System has been around now for a couple of decades. They've updated their guide just a little over 5 years ago. The intent of the National Incident Management System is to provide a consistent nationwide template for how we're going to respond to disasters that are large scale, that do involve state and federal governmental organizations, how we bring everybody together to reduce the loss of life, reduce harm to the environment, and make sure people are getting the services that they need. There are 3 main components of the National Incident Management System. There's resource management. We're not going to get into that today. There's communications and information management. We're not going to get into that today either. And then there's that middle one, command and coordination. And it has 4 elements to it. The Incident Command System, which lots of people are familiar with the term, because that is what our police departments, sheriff's departments, fire departments utilize on a regular basis. There are the emergency operations centers. There's the multi-agency coordination group. That's the MAC group that I mentioned earlier that you all are part of. And then there's the joint information systems. That's how we actually communicate that PIO messaging in a coordinated fashion. So here's a quick chart on what NIMS is and is not. I'm not going to talk about every one of these things, but I'm just going to point out a few highlights. NIMS is not just ICS, as you saw on that previous slide. It's not just Incident Command, even though a lot of people focus a lot of energy on the Incident Command System. It's much bigger than that. It's also not a response plan. We're responsible for planning separately from NIMS because what Washington, D.C. might plan may or may not work for us here in Doña Ana County. It's also not used just during large-scale incidents, and we'll show you some examples here of where we utilize NIMS for rather small things that happen within our county. And it's not just about how we communicate in interoperable communications or how we order resources. It really is about that entire disaster from a whole of community perspective. So there are some key characteristics. Again, not going to get into these, but some things that I think may be of particular interest to you is that it starts off with management by objectives. When we are working a disaster, we need to have clear objectives so that we can, A, determine whether or not we are working towards those objectives, we're meeting those objectives, and identify any roadblocks to those objectives. It also needs to have a manageable span of control. Span of control varies based on the complexity of the task. When we are talking about a disaster, span of control may be one supervisor for 2 people, 3 people. Ideally, it's between 3 to 7, though we do for rather simple tasks, we can go up to 1 to 20, 1 to 30, 1 to 50. And you can think of in terms of a high-risk task where lives are on the line, we're going to want that supervision very tight, very small span of control so that the supervisor's fully aware of everything going on. But if it is easy to see everybody, for example, we're doing a search of a field and we've got 50 volunteers lined up, one supervisor can keep that group of 50 in a line and moving forward pretty easily. So that's that example of that simple task. We do need to establish and transfer command in an orderly fashion. Now again, this is on the ICS side, so this is the on-scene portion of the disaster. And again, our sheriff's department, our fire department have lots of practice in how they do this. We also need to have a chain of command and unity of command. And if you haven't heard that term unity of command, here we're talking about each employee or each volunteer working a disaster reports to only one supervisor. So somebody else coming in from the outside, no matter their elected position, their appointed position title, or anything else, doesn't start giving directions to that employee or that volunteer without going through the supervisor. That way, the supervisor who's being held accountable for achieving the objectives knows what their people are doing and knows if there's been a change in direction. It's modular, so it's as small or as large as we need it to be based on the incident. It requires actually developing a plan for each operational period. The first operational period, usually it's a plan on the hood of a car or on a napkin or any scrap piece of paper we've got laying around. But by the second operational period, we start actually having a formal incident action plan that has been reviewed by the incident command team and is being shared with the MAC group and others. We do encourage, whenever possible, that our first responders utilize unified command. In today's world, it is rare that a large incident or disaster affects only one type of agency. In many cases, it's going to be a joint effort. And unified command provides people with that opportunity to share the responsibility as well as share different perspectives in coming up with those common incident objectives. Accountability is important, which hopefully you also value accountability, as is information and intelligence management. This is one that across the country has not done well, and we are really focusing our efforts on changing how we share information with the various constituents, whether that's people being impacted, whether that's our governmental leaders, whether that's external government officials. So here is where incident command comes in. It's those green boxes down there. You've got an incident commander, a unified command team, or even if we've got multiple disaster sites, an area commander. And then under them, they'll have an incident command post set up, and they'll have, or more incident command posts, and then they'll have operations taking place. And then above them is the Emergency Operations Center, and above the Emergency Operations Center is the MAC group, you all. And that's our local side. So again, what is ICS? It's that standardized on-scene all hazards incident management concept, and it does allow for other resources to be brought in from outside of our community, whether that's through mutual aid agreements, whether that's through contracting, whether that's through requests for assistance to state, regional, or federal assets, and then be able to be plugged straight into that incident command system with everybody understanding what their responsibilities are. So this does help to ensure safety of the responders and the public, helps us in developing and achieving our objectives and efficiently using resources, and ensures accountability at all levels. The benefits of using ICS is it does help us work with any size or type of incident, and it's cost effective. It avoids duplication of efforts while also helping ensure that we do not miss people that are in need. This is kind of the basics of the top level of the incident command system. Has that incident commander at the top, and oftentimes an operations section, a planning section, a logistics section, and then a finance or administration section. The incident commander is often the very first most qualified person at the scene, and then they may transfer that either shortly upon the arrival of somebody else higher qualified, or they may maintain it for the rest of that operational period and then transfer command. Here are some examples of where we utilize incident command in Doña Ana County, whether it's car crashes, whether it's events at New Mexico State University or at the fairgrounds, we're using incident command, bomb threats, Baton Memorial Death March, a variety of other incidents. We are utilizing incident command on a regular basis here. And again, as complexity increases, so does the need for resources, and then therefore so does the incident command system. That picture at the upper left is of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. And as large as Oklahoma City is, and as many resources as they have, when that incident occurred, they had the need for resources from all over the region to be brought in. So here's just a breakdown of the incident commander. They're responsible for that overall incident. The operations section has a chief, and it's important to note that they're called chief, but that may not be their daily title. So I have seen many police chiefs and fire chiefs that are not a chief when it comes to incident command. They may be a group supervisor or a team lead. And I've seen sergeants who are operations section chiefs because that's their area, lieutenants, captains. So important to just point out that those daily titles are not necessarily the titles that they'll have during an incident. So the incident commander's role, again, pretty basic. They've got that overall responsibility for the incident. They ensure coordination with the Emergency Operations Center and the Joint Information Center. They often delegate their authority to others, and the authority they have is often delegated to them by you. When you or your predecessors on the BOCC adopted the National Incident Management System over a decade ago as the way that our county is going to respond to large incidents and disasters, you did delegate some authorities down. You've also delegated authority for certain things to the county manager, such as the ability to spend emergency funds. And the county manager then may delegate to an incident commander during a large incident the authority to order resources out of that fund.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Sanchez.
just had a quick question for Mr. Lopez. Just wondering, I know when we talk on EOC and the work that's being done to coordinate, how has the Web EOC software helped with the coordination and as we've continued to kind of implement that system?
Madam Chair and Commissioner Sanchez, the WebEOC platform we are really enjoying. We utilize it every single month to activate countywide disaster messages. And if you all would like to receive those, your phone right now has them turned off by default, but you can activate them, and then the first Monday of every month, you'll see when we send out an iPause message. That iPause system gives us the ability to activate every single cell phone within the geography of the county and to have a persistent message so that we can say we want this message up for 12 hours, and anybody then that drives into the county during that time period will also get that message. You're probably most familiar with this if you've been woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning by a child missing from Albuquerque. That seems to be where most of our Amber Alerts come from. We're utilizing the same system, but we use it for all disasters, not just Amber Alerts. So WebEOC gives us that ability to activate that system. In addition, it's where we're uploading all of our forms like the incident action plan. So when an incident commander says, hey, we need help with that incident action plan, the forms are already there. We fill in the information, and it feeds very nicely. Coming up here in a minute, you'll see our community lifelines. That's also something built into WebEOC that we've done over the last year to where we can actually show at a glance anybody, whether that's Incident Command Team, EOC Operations, the state, or yourselves, what the status is of our community lifelines. You know, everything's looking good except we've got some transportation issues, or we've got fuel, we've got power issues. So it really does start to pull all of the various pieces of information into one place where we can then share it back out.
Great, thank you, Mr. Lopez. And Madam Chair, I should ask, is it appropriate to ask questions in the middle of it?
Absolutely, anytime you would like.
I just wanted to know if he wanted us to hold questions to the end. I just figured I'd jump in, but thank you, Mr. Lopez. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanchez. Mr. Lopez, if you'll continue, unless any other commissioner has any question at this time? Thank you.
Okay. So want to just talk real briefly about public information. Informing the public is absolutely crucial during a disaster. We need to be able to provide warnings, like I just mentioned with the IPAWS system, let people know where there's danger so that they can avoid it, or escape it. We're very fortunate here in Doña Ana County. We do not have very many instances where we would need to do a county-wide evacuation, which is really good because there's not really a place to go to from Doña Ana County that's close by. Because if something's hitting us, it's probably hitting El Paso also. But we do work closely with the City of El Paso, County of El Paso Office of Emergency Management, also in the planning here. The public information is more, though, than just those warnings. It's giving people guidance on what they can do to help themselves, where they can get resources. It's ensuring that rumors are being identified and accurate information being disseminated. And we utilize what we call a joint information system or joint information center. The system is how it's structured, the center is where it's at. And we even use a virtual joint information center where sometimes it's the governor's press secretary, it's somebody from the White House, and they're participating electronically with people that are working here. But that helps get all of the governmental partners on the exact same page and sharing the same accurate information. That does not mean that people participating in the PIO effort lose their individual responsibilities and authority. It just means that now they've all got the same baseline information that they can share back out to their constituents. And probably the easiest way to understand this is we have a county PIO and they will be pushing out the message, you know, here's what's going on. But there may be a PIO, for example, from the Las Cruces Public School District. They need that same information, but what they push out may be a little bit different, but still along the same lines because they need to be able to tell students and parents and teachers how that's impacting them at their schools and what may be going on. So the actual words coming out may be slightly different, but it is part of a single coordinated effort.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Sanchez?
Sorry, another question. I think this was a particularly important piece is getting that public information out. And I don't know if this is more to you or to county management, is how does our PIO interact with the OEM and also, you know, with our emergency department, so DASO, the fire, because I know when we last had La Union, and I felt like, and maybe because I'm on this side, not working specifically, seeing the stuff that our county manager sees, but I think, you know, the communication we were getting was, we need to get information out there, what's the process? And I felt like maybe we lagged on our side on how that is, because I know the sheriff wanted to get updates out, and she was trying to figure out, it's after hours, who do I call? So I don't know, like I said, from our side, how is that managed? And like I said, that may be you, that may be the county manager that may be able to answer that, but I just want to make sure that that's in place, because I'd want to make sure there's a standard process that whether it's Chief Cherry, Sheriff Stewart, whoever it may be, or you, we have that ability to be able to get the information out in different manners through the county.
Madam Chair and Commissioner Sanchez, fantastic question and very appropriate to understand how these pieces fall together. So if you look up at the top half of that slide, you'll notice there may be a separate PIO assigned to the incident command. And that may be the sheriff or a sergeant, or it may be the fire chief or a captain. We may also have a separate PIO for the EOC. We may also have a separate PIO representing you and county management. And during the La Union flooding, we actually did have these pieces, but we didn't really pull the Joint Information Center together quite as tight as we probably should have and certainly will be going forward, just because we didn't have common understanding among the PIOs, not because anybody did anything wrong, but because they hadn't had an opportunity for that joint training and practice. So we have fixed that. We worked with FEMA and the state of New Mexico to bring in a PIO course. It's a week-long course that's coming up here in April, and we're going to be hosting it just down the hall. And this is the first time that course has been offered since 2017 in New Mexico. And it is already overflowing with registrations. So we're actually 7 people deep into the wait list. So there's that much interest, and we do have our county PIOs that are registered for that course. So this is going to be a really good opportunity for them to kind of get that big picture so that for our next response, it's much more cohesive and flows much better.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. And Madam Chair, I don't know if I see our PIO, Ms. Skipper here. Would you be at all possible that I could ask her just on this topic?
Of course, Ms. Skipper. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. And I just want to make sure, like I said, I want to know because what it is from your side. Do you have the procedures in place or the support you need in order to be able to, fully support OEM or our different departments in an emergency?
Great question, Chair Chaparro, Commissioner Sanchez. We do. We actually have a great relationship with Stephen's office. He's my go-to anytime we want to know what's going on. And you've all experienced that he's pretty forthcoming with information to make sure that we're all on the same page. So at this point, thankfully, we haven't had any crisis, but I appreciate the efforts from Stephen because we're being proactive on making sure that we're prepared. I think we did learn a lot from La Union, and that is there were quite a few different people having different messages. And so we're working in the downtime, I would say, to make sure that we're all on the same page if something else does happen.
Okay, great. And I just want to make sure, like I said, if there is anything that we can do to continue to improve, I think you'll have the support, at least my support, I would assume also the commissioners, because I think it's so important, like as we saw, that getting, I think as Mr. Lopez pointed out, that trying to make sure we're getting information from a trusted source, which is the county, but also trying to address any rumors and any of that may start spreading very easily on social media. And I know we can't stop that, but it's absolutely important that we can do our efforts in making sure so that we get the proper information out there. So thank you so much for.
You're welcome. And I will add, the best way to limit the kind of things that you're talking about, particularly as quickly as things can move on social media, is to make sure that we are enforcing the county's policy and maybe even looking back at that policy on who actually does speak for the county and what channels and who's in control of that. I think we can go further with that. And so I will be bringing some information forward soon about that, just to make sure we are all on the same page. This is the time to do it. Unfortunately, when bad things happen is when you learn those lessons. And so I think we did learn quite a few things from La Union and some of the social media incidents we've had recently. So I hope there'll be some future conversations about that.
Right, thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Skipper. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Skipper. Any other questions for Ms. Skipper before she leaves the podium?
With that being said, Ms. Skipper, sorry, if you can send the commission that resolution so we can look at it with you and maybe brainstorm so that we can get that on the agenda as soon as possible, because that's probably something really important to look at, especially since the winds are starting up, as you know. So things are happening here. And so if you can forward that so we can look at that, and you can maybe give us the ideas of what needs to be changed so we can look at that and change that resolution.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sheldro Hernandez. Any other comments from the commissioners before Ms. Skipper leaves the podium, or she's already left the podium, but any other questions? Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Lopez.
So continuing on, I just want to note that there is a concept called an incident management team. An incident management team is a resource brought in from the outside when the local incident managers are just exhausted. They can't go on any further, or they just don't have the expertise because it's such a large incident. On the incident management team concept, New Mexico is in the process right now of putting together an incident management team to be able to serve especially the smaller counties in our area. Here in Doña Ana County, we actually have personnel that will probably be on the state team, subject to call if something bad happens. Right now, I am assisting them on the PIO side. Amanda Bowen from our office has already assisted last year during the wildfires on the planning section side. And then the other member of our office right now, Joy Chavez, is working through her classes on logistics. And as we hire another person, we have our last position open right now. Closes this Friday if you know anybody who's interested in working with us. And they will probably fill one of the other roles, whether that's liaison or safety office. And that doesn't mean we'll always be first up and leaving Doña Ana County without anybody. Each position should have at least 3 or 4 people identified for from resources across the state, so that we can, pick and choose who we're sending on any given disaster. But it ensures that we maintain good skills here within Doña Ana County at the highest level, and we have experience with that team so that if we ever need to bring in the other members of that team, we're very intimately familiar with how each other work, and we're able to integrate seamlessly.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephen, isn't there a resolution we passed creating the incident management team?
Commissioner Chaparro or Chair Chaparro, Commissioner Reynolds, I do not think it is specific to the incident management team. I believe it just simply stipulates that we will utilize the incident command system to manage an incident.
Yeah, I can't find my copy right now, but I'm sure I read somewhere like in 2008.
Correct.
2011, that we actually created an incident management team prior to the one that you created. I think the previous one actually had some specific people that were assigned to the incident management team. And I'm going to go back and look at that. I know it's in the old copy, and I just couldn't find it right now. But thank you.
Thank you, Chair Chaparro and Commissioner Reynolds. If you do find that, please let me know as well, because I don't recall seeing anything current that's that specific on that.
I will. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So again, the incident management team is something you may hear more of going forward, and Doña Ana County will be very closely involved in that effort. On Unified Command, as I mentioned, this is where multiple agencies share the responsibility for managing the incident. And this kind of gives you a little graphical representation where it may be 2 law enforcement agencies and a fire department. It may be a school district, a fire department, and a law enforcement agency coming together, developing one message, and then providing that direction to the people working there on the scene.
Mr. Lopez, I have a question regarding the previous slide under Unified Command, and I'm just going to throw an example out there. Let's say there was an earthquake at the base of the Oregon Mountains up on US 70. How would this Unified Command work in that instance?
Good question with an example there, Chair Chaparro. The concept is that first 8 hours or so is not going to be heavy on the EOC side. It is going to be heavy on that on-scene side, because there are people who are in danger, people who are injured, people who need to be rescued. So that is where those on-scene resources are really flowing into the area. Somebody needs to say, we're setting up incident command, here's where we're setting it up, and those other entities responding coming in together. So you can kind of envision, if we had that incident, we're going to have roads that need to be blocked, we're going to have people that need to be rescued, possibly fires from propane tank lines or natural gas lines that have occurred. We may even have water systems that have ruptured and are causing flooding as a result, as tanks are emptying out. So the Unified Command may pull together the sheriff, it may pull together the county fire chief, it may pull together somebody from roads. And then they get together and say, okay, here are our top 5 priorities. And you'll see an example here of the standard 5 top priorities in an incident. Always starts, number 1, with life safety. Here's where we expect people are injured right now based on 911 calls. Here are the resources we have available right now. And here's who we're going to send in. And if there are problems getting in, that's where, again, somebody like roads may be able to say, okay, we can get a grader and a front-end loader in to help get a team into this area. And they work together to develop those objectives based on, we need somebody here, we need somebody there, and working with, obviously, Mesilla Valley Regional Dispatch Authority on those 911 calls as they're coming in, and being able to lay those out on a map and make those tactical decisions on what they're going to be doing. Does that help make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
And I mentioned earlier the concept of area command. This is when a disaster covers a large geographic area. And while we keep referring to it, myself included, as the 2021 La Union flood, that flooding actually impacted from White Sands Missile Range, the city of Las Cruces, the city of Anthony, our unincorporated areas between Las Cruces and Sunland Park, and the city of Sunland Park. And so there were different operations going on in each of those places. So, for example, the city of Anthony asked for water pumps to be able to remove some water. City of Sunland Park asked for 3 water pumps. City of Las Cruces needed some road barricades because they actually had a road collapse. And then you're very familiar with how much we had going on down in the actual La Union area. So that's an example of how we had different operations going on in each area. So while we had that area command set up, they were saying, okay, what's going on down in Sunland Park, these are the resources they need, taking those off of the available resource list and deploying them out. And we did that throughout the entire county for a couple of days. The things that impact how big the incident command gets, how complex it is, are things like how long will it last? How long do we have to be self-sufficient? And the answer is, from what we saw in the fires last year, a while. It's days at least, if not a week or 2, that we in our county need to be able to at least protect life safety. And, when's the actual incident going to be over? Because we may have an incident that lasts 3 or 4 days, think in terms of a hurricane or an earthquake with aftershocks, but we have to be engaged in operations from when it happens. We can't just wait until it's all over before we start helping people. So let's move on now to the MAC group. This is you. You're at the top of our local response. And this is an area that I think we have not done enough in part because we didn't have common training. We're fixing that today. And we didn't have a good mechanism for doing this. So this is actually our starting point for discussion. We're going to be coming back to you for quite a while, talking about how we can improve this. But the MAC group may start off with, for example, the chair of the board coming to the EOC, getting a briefing, sharing information, giving some direction. But if we need to actually declare a disaster, we're going to need you all to come together as a formal body, make that disaster declaration, and perhaps even give us some policy direction or even change county policy to enable us to take certain actions. Things like county policy on spending limits. That's one that's almost always necessary when we have a large disaster. The state of New Mexico just changed this last year what it takes for our county to declare a financial disaster, and that is over $800,000 now. And I believe the spending limit you have given to the county manager is not that high. So, in between what he has normally available to him and where we can actually start asking for state assistance, you would then need to, in your disaster declaration, provide that emergency authorization for the additional expenditure of funds. So again, you give us the policy guidance. You may support resource prioritization and allocation. You help enable decision-making among elected and appointed officials, and you will be joined in that MAC group, not just with yourselves, but potentially other elected officials, such as from the City of Las Cruces, City of Sunland Park, with some senior decision makers and potentially senior public safety officials and high-level subject matter experts, where you can sit down and actually discuss things. Now, we can't bring the entire board together necessarily in a MAC group meeting, which is why it typically ends up being the chair or vice chair of the BOCC representing the board and then reporting back out to the public via a full board meeting. So if you hear that we've got a disaster going on moving forward, again, lessons learned from the 2021 flooding, fully expect that whoever is sitting in the chair and vice chair positions, we're going to ask you to be very busy and sharing with us that guidance of what you're hearing, what you think we need to be doing, not the tactical of we need somebody going over to this house, but what is the mission of the county? What do we want to make sure is being achieved?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Childs Hernandez.
I have a quick question. Do we have any policy that says that we have to convene in person to do that, to convene as the EOCC, or can we do that telephonically? Can we do that through Zoom? We can, so that's in a policy.
Madam Chair, may I answer that?
Commissioner Reynolds.
Yeah, if in fact we're having any kind of meeting at all, telephonic, Zoom, as long as the board is getting together, we can actually have a con call. So,
Okay.
and make a decision that way especially under a state of emergency. But anything that's authorized under the Open Meetings Act for qualified meeting, we can use for this.
Okay.
And Madam Chair,
Commissioner Sanchez.
I'll just add on to what Commissioner Reynolds said. I think the key part, and Mr. Gooden can correct me, I believe, is that the important part is that it has to be open and visible to the public when we meet. And that way, or at least recorded, in which they can, we have that ability that the public can see what went on during that meeting.
What does notice look like for that, though?
Man, I'm sorry, what's your question?
What does notice look like for
In the case of emergency, the notice is like
5
72
minutes?
hours max.
72 hours.
Unless it's an emergency, we can meet immediately, given certain guidelines. Sorry, Mr. Gooden, you can.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, excuse me, that question was directed to Mr. Gooden, so Mr. Gooden, would you please?
Madam Chair, Commissioner, yeah, so we have to follow the Open Meetings Act. There is a provision that allows for a meeting to be held with 24 hours notice or even less if it is an emergency. If that happens, then we have to report to the Attorney General's office that we had the meeting. And so there are some provisions that allow us for that. As far as being able to do them, not everybody in person, that can be done. However, we have to, as we give our notice, notify people how they can hear what's going on. And everybody that's participating in the meeting, the commissioners, have to be able to hear one another, and the public needs to be able to hear them in that meeting. So typically our preference would be that we at least get some people in the room here, and if others can't either participate by Zoom or by phone or whatever. So there are some provisions that allow us to do it with 24 hours notice or even less if it is an emergency. The risk that always exists is if the Attorney General were to determine that, well, this really wasn't an emergency, any action that was taken could be considered invalid and have to be redone. For special meetings, if it's a meeting that's not one of our every second and fourth Tuesdays, we can do a special meeting with 72 hours notice. And with that, then there's no additional reporting requirement to the Attorney General's office. So yes, there are mechanisms if we need to. We don't have to, we have to give a week's notice. We have methods. Unfortunately, we haven't really had to rely on that emergency 24 hours before, but it is available if we have to.
Thank you, Mr. Gooden. Any other questions from any commissioner?
Madam Chair, yeah.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Just one more thing is, even to declare an emergency, we still only need a quorum to do it. We don't have to have 4 or 5 commissioners to do it. So as long as we have a quorum for the meeting, even regardless, we can declare emergency, just 3 of us.
That's correct. Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the board, one of the reasons I mentioned that we haven't really delved into utilizing the MAC group well in the past is because we haven't had a good place for the MAC group to meet. Those of you who have been over to our current facility may realize that our Emergency Operations Center isn't even adequate for a large modern disaster, which is why we're moving so fast on trying to get our new facility constructed. The new facility will have an area that the rest of the year we utilize as a classroom for training, but when there is a disaster, it is utilized as the MAC group meeting location and is large enough to be able to hold those representatives from all of the jurisdictions within Doña Ana County, along with the other members that are noted, that are identified here on the slide set.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Reynolds?
thank you. Stephen, since you're talking about the MAC group and who we are right now, are you familiar with 1210? The state statute 1210, local emergency management? I assumed you were. Okay.
Yes,
Are
sir.
you familiar with 1210.5?
You'd have to refresh me on the exact number, but I'm pretty familiar with that whole section.
1210.5 states that the governing bodies, that's us, of the political subdivisions of the state are responsible for all hazard emergency management of their respective jurisdictions. Each political subdivision is authorized to establish by ordinance or resolution, which we have, a local emergency management as agency of the local government and responsible to a governing body in accordance with state emergency operations plans and programs. Every local coordinator, emergency management shall be appointed by the governing body, subject to the approval of the State Director of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And a local coordinator shall have direct responsibility for carrying out all hazard emergency management program of the political subdivision. Okay. Based on that, when were you elected by this board to be the emergency manager of our OEM, of Office of Emergency Management?
So Chair Chaparro, Commissioner Reynolds, I have not been. The practice that's been followed for a long time has not been an appointment directly by the board, even though, as you noticed, that is what statute has identified. So 2 meetings ago, you actually passed the authorization for us to publish a notice for amending BOCC policy, and that'll be coming up to you next meeting on the 28th, where you have that opportunity. Right now, the draft says you are appointing the Office of Emergency Management, and that for daily functions, you're having us report to the county manager. So that will be actually the first time that it would be reflected in county ordinance, exactly that language. And obviously, it's a draft, so the board members can make amendments as you see fit next meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, too, I believe that through the personnel ordinance, Chapter 45, which delegates to the county manager all personnel matters, I believe that basically covers it as well. So I don't think that we're out there with Mr. Lopez being in this position, being unauthorized or not being approved by the board. I think it is covered by that delegation, but it sounds like Mr. Lopez has taken some other steps to just clarify that as well in the upcoming meetings. But I believe that has, through the personnel ordinance, it delegated that authority to the county manager. I believe you've delegated that authority for this position as well.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Gooden.
Madam Chair, thank you. Mr. Gooden, so have we also delegated the authority for the Homeland Security, State Director of Homeland Security Emergency Management to recognize this or not?
I'm not sure I understand the question. It's a two-step process appointed by the board, which is where I believe that delegation has been done. It still needs their approval from the state. Now, whether that has been done, I don't know. But as far as the board's act, the BOCC's action in making the appointment, I believe that is delegated
but there sounds like there's going to be some clarifications to some of that as well.
Madam Chair, Mr. Gooden, thank you. Actually, I'm not sure I agree, so I'd like to have a clarification on the fact that our resolution or ordinance actually delegating that authority extends to the Emergency Management Office, because I'm not sure, I'd like to see that in the policy and be satisfied that in fact we are delegating that authority to him directly, because according to another statute I read in the Attorney General Declaration, that the only authority that the county manager has is the authority that this board can delegate to him. And so I think so specifically, we should delegate this specifically to him if we're going to allow him to make this appointment. And then make sure that there's no problem with the state statute that recognizes this board as the authority to do it, and that we do in fact have the power to delegate that to him.
Thank you, Commissioner Reynolds. And Mr. Gooden, if you would please kindly look into that and forward us emails regarding that information.
I will do that, but I think it's kind of getting us a little bit off the point of Mr. Lopez's presentation on what happens when there's an emergency. But yes, we will definitely look in these other matters.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. You can continue.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gooden. It may be taking us off, but the fact that someone has been in the position since January 2001, and we haven't officially appointed him to the position, suggests that we may be in violation of something. I'd like to get a clarification on that as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Commissioner
Thank you.
Reynolds. And I'm sure that Mr. Gooden will forward to us by email any information regarding that. Mr. Lopez, you may continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just on that second part, the state does review our hiring decisions because they do provide us with the funding, and that's how they ensure compliance on their side, is that continued funding that we receive. So with that, operational priorities. The MAC group has a priority list that we recommend for consideration during any disaster, similar to what we recommend for the incident command system. Number one, save lives. That should be a pretty easy directive for the MAC group to give to the incident command team. Protect property and the environment, stabilize the incident. And here's where things start to change a little bit. You notice that on the chart that we distributed to you, you actually are above the EOC. The first 3 bullet points really are focused on that incident command system on the ground. But the incident commander does not really worry about sheltering and providing for food and things like that. Those are responsibilities that usually flow through the Emergency Operations Center. Same thing with restoration of utilities. That's not usually the responsibility of the Sheriff's Department or the Fire Department. That's something that we work with on the community lifelines. Same with restoring essential program functions and coordinating with other stakeholders and representing, to other political bodies, financial institutions, any legal concerns or anything else that may exist. So the direction that you would provide generally will come from you to the EOC director, and you'll tell us this is what we want to see, and then we will push that out to incident command. These are the things you all need to take care of per the MAC group, and then we will build whatever needs to be built to reestablish those community lifelines in order to get the community towards recovery. And when we get to that slide, we'll talk a little more in depth about those community lifelines.
And Mr. Lopez, I hate to interrupt you, but I've been asked to take a 5-minute break at this time.
Absolutely.
I'm so sorry for the interruption, but we will be, if that's all right with the rest of the commission, we'll be taking a 5-minute break. Thank you.
Madam Chair, when do we want?
Presentation, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The guidance that is given by the senior official and/or MAC group generally includes some of the following: delegating the appropriate authority to the EOC director for that particular incident. So for example, the county manager may say, I'm delegating to the EOC director the authority to spend anything up to my dollar limit that is necessary to carry out getting resources, providing emergency shelter, whatever else may occur. They may also provide a policy statement to the EOC saying that we want to make sure these particular things are addressed. That policy statement may include things like ensuring that emergency shelters are set up, that emergency food is delivered into an area, that consideration is given to people who might have particular social or other vulnerabilities or access and functional needs or disabilities. It may also determine EOC reporting requirements in that policy statement. So they may say, we want an update every 4 hours, every 8 hours, every 12 hours, once a day, whatever that might be. And it may determine if there does need to be a decision above the EOC level, what is necessary in order to call the group together to make that decision. And it may also identify any fiscal issues and possible parameters for the EOC and define any strategic level, and again, strategic, not tactical, those strategic level priorities for the incident. So that may mean things like, we've got 4 major roadways that are currently down and not accessible. Our priorities as the MAC group are, let's get this one open first because it's also impacting access to medical care, then this one, and then the last one. Yes. Yes. So this is the senior official. This is for example, the county manager. The responsibilities that the county manager might have as the senior official for the county would be, again, ensuring that safety of the citizens, protection of property, ensuring continuity of government. And this is really important because sometimes our governmental services are impacted by a disaster. And there are a lot of people that rely on some of our government services. Activating specific legal authorities. So that senior official is responsible for saying, you know what, we need a disaster declaration. This is above what I can authorize, and calling together the BOCC. Making decisions on evacuations may also be something that a senior official may provide insight on. Some senior officials, for example, the sheriff in particular by name and statute, already have the authority given to them by state statute to do things like declare an evacuation zone. However, interestingly, as we're on that topic, slight rabbit trail here, in New Mexico, there is no such thing as a mandatory evacuation. The word is used a lot, but we cannot force somebody to leave their home. And if somebody wants to stay in their home, by statute, they can do so. We can encourage them and take all kinds of steps to try to motivate them to leave, but that is their decision. We have found that in looking at examples from across the country, things like iPause messaging, where their phone is giving them that notification, this is real, this is important, actually is very beneficial in kind of providing that motivation, because it's something that they typically rely on for everyday information gathering. And so by utilizing that path, not social media, but something that's actually ringing their phone, does help in getting evacuations. And the second thing that helps in getting people to evacuate is making sure we consider their pets part of their family. The number one reason people do not evacuate is their pets and livestock. And thanks to you all and the funding support you provided with ARPA funds, the developments we've made at the county fairgrounds to where we can shelter people, pets, and livestock really does alleviate one of those biggest hurdles for people that might otherwise not leave a disaster area. The senior official might also delegate authority to the incident commander In case there's any question as to whether or not they've got the authority, they can say, yes, that is the person. It may not be the agency head because the agency head is out of town, but that is the person who's got authority to make decisions in incident command. They will coordinate with the PIO to keep the media and the public informed. They may request assistance from state agencies through the EOC. They will also help in resolving resource allocation conflicts. If you tend to get in from one area, hey, we're not getting the help we think we need, and from another area, we're not getting the help we need, and there are finite resources, then usually somebody like the county manager has to make that decision of saying, all right, in looking at the big picture, here's where we need to make that allocation for now, while we're getting additional resources to help everybody. And then they will coordinate with other senior officials like city mayors and then whole of community partners. And of course, they will participate in that MAC group. Within incident command, you notice the senior official does not have a role in the incident command system. They do not take over as the incident commander. They are delegating their authority for on-scene operations to the incident commander unified command team. They provide that policy guidance during the disaster. They may activate specific legal authorities, such as that spending authority that we've discussed a couple times, and they will support resource coordination to the incident command through the EOC. But for the most part, that senior official's connection point to the disaster is the EOC, just like the rest of the MAC group. On the delegation of authority, just real quickly, it may be in writing, but it could be verbal as well. We prefer in writing, established in advance, and that's why we are starting to go through now. And the next meeting is not going to be the only time we come before you to add to or tweak county ordinances, because there's a lot of work to be done, but these were the kind of things that we needed to immediately take care of, and we'll have more over the next couple of years to clearly establish certain things like legal authorities, financial authorities, and restrictions and reporting requirements. Other considerations for the senior official and the MAC group also are those demographic issues. How do we ensure equity in the disaster response, political implications, agency and jurisdictional priorities, any plans for public information management, the process for communicating, and the plan for ongoing incident evaluation. And while we're mentioning yet again public information, I want to point out that you, as commissioners, play an important role in our public information efforts. If you get something from the PIOs, whether that's the PIO assigned to the MAC group, that's the county PIO, please help us disseminate that information to your constituents. You all have a different reach into your communities and to your districts than our official communication channels do. That's how you got elected. So during a disaster, that's really beneficial to us if you can help send that message back out. If the disaster is impacting your particular district, then we may ask you to come in and be part of a community meeting with people that are impacted, so you can both hear what's going on and reassure them that you, as their elected representative, are monitoring what's occurring and ensuring that things are happening in the way that it should. Now move on to the emergency operations centers real briefly. So again, the EOC is between the MAC group and the incident command. You'll notice that just like you might have coordination with a state MAC group, which may include the governor's office all the way up to the White House, from our side, we would have coordination with the state EOC, with federal EOCs, as well as, you notice there's kind of a second line down below, State Department Operations Centers and Business Emergency Operations Centers. During a disaster, there might be in one area 5 or 6 EOCs that are activated, each with a different focus. Ours obviously is going to be whole of community, but some of the other EOCs might be very sector specific. For example, if there is a large electrical outage, El Paso Electric is going to stand up their EOC focused on restoration of their services. If it's affecting a school district, that school district might stand up their EOC to make decisions and take actions specific to how it's affecting their school district. Same thing with New Mexico State University or Doña Ana Community College, might stand up their own EOC just to focus on their needs. Walmart, we actually are in contact a couple times a year just to touch base with Walmart's Global Emergency Operations Center, because they actually can control commodities flowing into our community. We want to keep that relationship very strong, because a semi-truckload of food, water, or toilet paper can be very impactful during a disaster response. And so the EOC will do that coordination with other EOCs in order to share resources, share information, and support each other. So here is a look literally into our undersized current Emergency Operations Center. It has some really good equipment. It's just not big enough. We have 14 workstations, and there are frequently way more than 14 people we need to have operating in there. It looked good compared to what we had before this. But now that we've been through some disasters, including COVID and the migrant crisis, we definitely need something more capable, which is what we're all working towards. But we do help to establish that shared operational picture we've mentioned earlier, and simplify information verification so that the MAC group can hit one location and say, is this really what's going on? The incident commander can contact us and say, is this what we're really hearing? And we can kind of standardize that. We also take over at some point for incident command. So for example, once the Sheriff's Department, once the Fire Department are done with their operations, incident command shuts down. The community usually has not recovered at that point from a disaster. Recovery usually takes weeks to months to years, depending on how big that disaster has been. And that responsibility of ensuring that is carried out rests with the Emergency Operations Center until you all as a body say, yes, we're comfortable that we've reached the greatest state of recovery. We also, and this is just a quick plug here of policy approach, we also start looking at things of how do we ensure people not just have a place to live, but also a place to work. So one of the policies we've adopted is wherever we can during a disaster response is we buy local. So when we're looking at feeding people, we want to hire the food service from local restaurants and share the wealth. When we're looking at we need certain supplies, we'd much rather get those supplies from a local business that's supporting local jobs, which is then supporting people who have those jobs from the community, because they need their paychecks to keep coming in if they're also going to recover. One of the sad things from a disaster standpoint is 80% of small businesses in a large disaster fail within 18 months. And that's one of our goals, is to ensure that does not happen in our county by spending our dollars towards recovery as much as we can locally, so that those businesses have a way to stay open.
Commissioner Murillo, you were...
Yes, Madam Chair. To refresh my memory, Stephen, for a future site, where are you planning to expand? I can't remember where.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Murillo, we are right now in lease negotiations with New Mexico State University for just east of Interstate 25 near their water tanks and golf course for an approximately 7.5 acre site right there. The survey work started last week, and once that is done, it gives us the legal description to then take to the NMSU Board of Regents for permission for that lease to occur. If they are in agreement, which we are certainly hopeful they are, because we already had a meeting with their real estate committee, which is 3 of their 5 voting members of their board, then we will be bringing it back to you all for review and approval.
And the building will be funded through New Mexico State, and then they'll lease you or will it be Doña Ana County?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Murillo, the building would be owned by Doña Ana County. So we're looking at a very long-term lease, 75-year, 99-year type lease.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Lopez.
So moving on to EOC functions, again, collecting, analyzing, and sharing of information. This is from a FEMA slide right here, and it shows you even FEMA is putting high priority on that information collecting, analyzing, and sharing. And this is something that our office has changed our focus on in the last few years to where that is now a primary focus. In fact, FEMA in 2018 they used to have just the incident command system model of an EOC. It looked just like the incident command system on scene. The problem is they're different roles and there are different responsibilities. So in 2018, they came up with an incident support model, which we're going to show you here in just a moment. And that incident support model really highlights the need and the importance for collecting, analyzing, and sharing of information, as well as supporting the resource allocation and tracking. So here's that kind of picture. You have an EOC director. You might have that public information officer attached to the EOC, and then you've got a situational awareness section. This is something that, thanks to the approvals from the county, we've been able to add those positions within our office to where now we can have an EOC director and a situational awareness section supervisor, no matter what time it is, day or night. We tend to work 12-hour shifts, so I might be the EOC director for the first shift, and then our deputy director, Amanda Bowen, sitting behind me, may take over the night shift, or vice versa. I think I'm scheduled for the night shift next because she had to work the night shift during the 2021 floods, so she'll get to see daylight next time. And then we can actually send somebody from the EOC to the scene to do that situational awareness. So we're not taking time away from the incident command. They can take the pictures. They can lead a team in assessing how much damage has occurred, which critical infrastructure has been impacted, and get that information to the decision makers, sharing it both with the incident commander as well as with our MAC group.
Chair, I have a quick question.
Commissioner Shelter Hernandez.
With that being said, and talking about getting information out to the MAC, is there a way to streamline that process using web EOC, especially not just to the commissioners, but also any other affected elected official, whether it's to strengthen ties with our state legislatures, and maybe talking about if there's something going on in Anthony and including those to where there's a list of people that we need to contact that just doesn't include our county manager and administrative offices, but, you know, hey, there's something going on in Anthony, we need to get the trustees involved, we need to get Messia involved, we need to get the board, and that way it's blanketed so we're not being, I feel like there's a bottleneck sometimes, and is there a way to remove that bottleneck that is currently there?
Chair Chaparro, Commissioner Saldro Hernandez, you have just described our vision and exactly where we're trying to go with WebEOC. So spoiler alert, we're requesting an increase in our budget for this next fiscal year to develop in-house the capabilities of our staff to modify that WebEOC platform to be able to really get it to perform to its fullest. It's utilized across the country, and it is utilized very effectively to do exactly like you're talking about. We can link our platform to the state's platform. We can link our platform to White Sands Missile Range and to El Paso and to this FEMA region, 5-state region. But we're new to it, so we need that training, and so we're asking in our budget request for being able to get some of our people through that training so we can keep modifying it and really maximizing it to where it automatically feeds. As soon as we push an update, it hits the state EOC, it hits El Paso EOC, it hits White Sands, anybody else using it. When we do an incident action plan, we hit a button and it automatically generates that report that can go out to, for example, the MAC group, literally with just an automatic push of the button, so we're not having to download it and print it as a PDF and attach it to an email and look up email addresses. It's all built in.
And With that too, is that also smaller incidents? In a slide you had car accidents, bomb threats, such like that. Would that also be like active shooter situations? Any situation that's out in the community where there's maybe some kind of chase going on or anything like that, would those also be in that system?
Chair Chaparro, Commissioner Shaljo Hernandez, maybe. The system will certainly be able to do it, but we also at the EOC need to know something's going on for us to be able to push it out. So we do have the ability, and we're building that right now with our first response agencies, that they can, from the scene, utilize WebEOC to start their incident command. But the reality is it's going to take a while, and it's probably never going to get down to what I would consider the everyday type of things, like community watch type pages automatically pick up. Everybody's wondering what's going on because there are 2 police cars outside of Dunkin' Donuts or whatever it might be. But, but certainly when we hit that disaster level and the EOC is activated, that is exactly what we intended to happen. Anytime the EOC is activated, people would have access to that information.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Following along with the line of Commissioner Shaljo Hernandez's comment, question, can we use the incident command system to do some of that, to alert everyone? I mean, we still have access to it here locally, correct?
So Chair Chaparro, Commissioner Reynolds, so the incident command system, certainly the PIO from there that's appointed by the incident commander or unified command certainly can do that. Or are you talking about the IPAWS system where we can blast out a message?
Yeah, can't we do that locally here? I mean, don't we have the authority to do that? So you could actually create a list of people and say, this are the people that I want to be notified on their phone with an emergency notification, like Commissioner's asking about.
Chair Chaparro, Commissioner Reynolds. So yes, now I understand exactly what you're asking. Mesilla Valley Regional Dispatch can build that automatically into their dispatch protocols so that when they generate a type code that may be a SWAT call out, for example, that it can automatically send those messages to a predefined group. Now, they're certainly not going to ever do that to public because they don't want the public to necessarily know about some of these things. But yes, that technology exists, and that's in the Mesilla Valley Regional Dispatch Authority side.
Okay.
And we can certainly build on that once we are activated in the EOC. And that's actually how we envision things right now is MRVDA might send out a message at the request of an incident commander who may still be driving to the scene that something's going on, but it doesn't penetrate quite to the same level as the IPAWS system. So once we get that message, then we can re-amplify it using IPAWS to that whole geographic area.
Well, let me understand your challenge, and excuse me, Madam Chair. So you could also use distribution lists for email. You could use them for text groups as well. So it seems to me, unless you're looking to notify someone with a whole lot of information, I don't see where another system is going to be required to do what we need to do today.
Chair Chaparro and Commissioner Reynolds, so the WebEOC platform does have that ability. We're just now implementing it. As a matter of fact, Deputy Director Bowen just started that work 2 weeks ago with WebEOC to be able to do that so that when we share those actual situation reports, or sit reps as we typically refer to them as, that's where we can just push that button and it automatically goes to the people who need it. Had we had that when COVID started, the daily report that we're still doing right now, that would have been so much easier.
Okay, so how do I get it? You push the button at WebEOC, I get notified. In what form do I get it? Do I get it on an email, a text, a phone call? What do I get?
Chair Chaparro, Commissioner Reynolds, yes, sir. Whichever of those is appropriate based on the information. So for example, if we need to send an electronic document, the phone call certainly isn't going to help you, but we can send it as a link in an email and in a text so that you can get it either way. You'll get that immediate notification through a text message, and there's a link that you can then download it, or through an email, the document would be attached.
Okay, so I guess I understand that Web EOC, then you're saying is already something we have. It's not something we have to purchase, it's just a procedure that you have to implement.
Chair Chaparro, Commissioner Reynolds, it is something that you all funded us already to purchase, so we do already have it, but it is a cloud-based platform, so we do have annual recurring expenses with that. So you'll see that as a line item in our budget coming up for this next fiscal year once again.
Okay, I'm personally confused. I mean, not the rest of them, they all seem satisfied. I'm personally confused as to why we need to add another system to something we could already do with most of the tools that we already have, and I'd like to see how I'm looking here at what you're saying, but I'm not understanding the differentiation between what we already have and how much more of an improvement this is going to be and how it's going to prevent us or keep us from having the same problems we already have in communication.
Chair Chaparro and Commissioner Reynolds, so this is what we've been utilizing now for the last year and a half. And we're just now adding on to the capabilities that we're able to utilize from that platform. So this is exactly what we've been utilizing for our disaster management and where we've been putting into our plans and everything else is the Web EOC platform.
Okay, so it sounded to me like you were changing things.
And if I may, I'd like for Mr. Lopez to continue his presentation. I know that you have mentioned that we would be able to discuss anything further when you present your budget. And I'd like to encourage all the commissioners to please send questions either to Mr. Lopez or Mr. Gooden or County Manager Macias, because I think we're getting off of the presentation at this time. Thank you, commissioners.
Madam Chair, I did have one question for Mr. Lopez. And
Yes,
I don't know if it's Mr. Lopez specifically again or to our county management. Well, I understand. I think going back to the vice chair's comments, and I think even piggybacking what Commissioner Reynolds was saying, I would very much love to see an SOP or a process for the county, specifically the county, that would indicate, and I think that to me, this is just a multifaceted approach. Do we need an emergency declaration from the BOCC? Yes or no? Who do we notify in a case like this? Or, was this, what type of incident is this? Is it this, is it that? And it goes, we have something standard so that anybody in the county, whether it's county manager, assistant county manager, any of the department heads, elected officials could look at a process and be like, okay, this is the process we're running through right now. This is what we're gonna do. And this is gonna be our thought process for everybody. And I should say, I know we don't have that. I could be wrong, but I don't feel like we have that in writing aside from our emergency plan that the OEM puts out for the entire area. But I mean specific for the county, I would love for us to have something to indicate, okay, this is steps we're gonna follow. Do we need to have an emergency meeting? Do we need to do this, do that, et cetera? Because I know in the past, again, I hate to go back, to La Union, it's like, okay, we had to push a lot to be like, okay, we need this. Okay, I need this information. And then there was so much of the telephone game that was going on, not because of, I'm not pointing at you, I think from the county management side of it, I would have to call another, I get a text or from another commissioner or, Commissioner Murillo in her capacity as well as Mayor of Anthony was saying, have we heard this? Have we heard that? Can this happen? Can that happen? Like I said, we were all trying to communicate as much as we could, but there was just not a standard process to get it out. And I understand, like I said, I know that was learning from us, but like I said, I think from the county side, I would like us from county management to have like an SOP or something that says, these are the processes we do. So then there's no question whether we need an emergency meeting or we can wait till the next BOCC meeting.
Chair Chaparro, Commissioner Sanchez, that's exactly what this change in our focus to the incident support model reflects, is our same desire to do that. And by your saying that you want that standardized process, you have just made our deputy emergency manager very happy because she loves that standardized process. And we are absolutely working that direction with that situational awareness section. Now, I will tell you, there is nobody else in New Mexico that has adopted the incident support model. We are leading the state. The closest area that has adopted this approach to really making that information sharing important is Denton, Texas. So we actually have already reached out to them and obtained their standard procedures, and we're looking at how we can adapt what applied to them to us. So we are right in the midst of exactly what you're talking about.
Great. And I think then the reason I bring, and I know what, like, I guess the dance is obviously, you're managing the OEM, which supports all of the jurisdictions here across the county and in southern New Mexico. Well, I shouldn't say all of southern, but, at the same time, I'm looking specific even for the county. So like I said, I think, like I said, I don't know sometimes whether to put that to you or to the county management, but I appreciate your thoughts. And like I said, I would love to go in that direction. So thank you for your comments.
Mr. Lopez,
Thank you,
it
Madam
seems
Chair.
like you're a step ahead of us on our questions, which is a good thing.
Madam
Appreciate it.
Chair. Yeah, and also, he's also responsible for reporting to the state as well. I mean, he has a link to them. It's probably a more solid link than the dash link that he has to us, because that's where his primary responsibility is, according to state statutes.
And I'll leave it with that comment. Thank you, sir. So I mentioned earlier, community lifelines. In the past, the Office of Emergency Management focused on what were called emergency support functions. The emergency support functions, there were 15, and then there were 21, really said, this is who's in charge of each section of the response, and here are their responsibilities. So if there is a road issue, then it is county roads who's in charge. And that worked fine as long as only a single jurisdiction was involved in an incident. But the moment we had multiple jurisdictions involved, such as the city of Anthony, Doña Ana County, city of Sunland Park, whose road department is in charge? Who's got the biggest impact? What if they're all busy? So we really searched for a better way to do this, and we came across the Community Lifeline model, which really says it's not about who's in charge, it's about what needs to be done. And we will assign teams to get done what needs to be done rather than worrying about who sits in that head chair. So we have redone the Community Lifelines. I will say that FEMA does not have government services as its own community lifeline. We believe, though, the role, especially in our part of the United States, of local government can be so impactful that we have to look at government services as part of a community lifeline, because it may have, for example, Meals on Wheels, where if suddenly we lose our government, we lose the ability to feed people, and now we've actually expanded the disaster's impact rather than worked on trying to reduce it. So governmental services is now its own as we look at it. And we also took out one from transportation, though I'm up to anybody convincing me to put it back in. We took out maritime services. We just don't think there's enough water in the Rio Grande River to justify a Coast Guard operation. But if anybody can convince me otherwise, we'll put it back in. But this really does give you a look at what we're going to be focused on during a disaster and the teams that we will be forming in order to address these needs. So we'll have obviously the safety and security, which is generally going to be police and fire. We will have food, water, and shelter, which understandably, that's the very basics of the human needs. Health and medical is there. Energy, which is power and fuel. Communications, which is internet, telephone, 911 access, radio communications for our first responders. Then there's transportation. And then hazardous materials is its own separate community lifeline, in part because they provide some of the things that we need during a disaster response, and in part because they can also magnify the impact of the disaster. So those are the community lifelines, and those are the ways that we'll be focused on working a disaster from this point and moving forward. And we really just adopted this. We really got our heads wrapped around how we can implement this just in the last 6 months. So we've now started having sector-specific meetings with people. We already had our first one with health and medical on how we're going to get everybody working together and what their responsibilities will be. And we'll be continuing on now with the other sectors.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Reynolds?
Stephen, as part of this, have you actually considered the a risk analysis as part of this, because I think even though you've got all the communication lifelines here, I think anticipation of where the risk might be and what resources might be needed, I think is something that I don't see on this chart that I think might be of value.
So Chair Chapato, Commissioner Reynolds, there's actually an entire plan specifically about the risk. And we are now looking at each of these as they tie to that plan. That's what we call our THIRA, the Threats, Hazards, Identification, and Risk Analysis Plan. And we're now in our second phase of that plan. And you're absolutely right. We look at how each of these, in particular, communities that have high social vulnerability are impacted. You know, do they only have one way in or out via a road? Are they serviced by mostly dollar stores and not really a good supermarket, so that there's not much depth in what's available for food in that community? So that is all fed into that plan.
Thank you. The reason I mention that is because from our perspective, managing policy and laws and funding budget, that's probably where we have the opportunity to make the biggest impact in order to make this model work. Because if we don't invest in the proper infrastructure, proper devices, equipment, people, services in order to mitigate the risks that we anticipate, then we end up behind the cue ball like we were with the COVID. And that's part of, I'm sure we depend on you to do that. So I would like to see a merger of an integration between this and the risk at some point in time, unless it's already in the presentation on down here.
Chair Chapato, Commissioner Reynolds, it's not part of the presentation, but yes, that linkage does exist, and we're happy to discuss it offline any point you'd like. But guaranteed, we will be coming back to this board with multiple projects that we are hoping to accomplish to reduce risk within the unincorporated areas of Doña Ana County by district. So we'll be actually having one-on-one conversations with each commissioner as to what's in their district and what those threats are, what the opportunities are for moving forward and planning. We believe we should have at least a 5-year plan for how we're going to improve services within each district.
And I think it's going to be almost impossible to do what Commissioner Sanchez has requested without merging these resources with the risk policy to determine where we act and how we act and you know, who's acting and who's not, and what resources they need and where the resources are located. I think that's a bigger challenge as well. Like we didn't have, you know, who had the COVID shots? Where were they at? Who was administering them? You know, who could do it? How could we get the people there? Transportation. It becomes a much more complex problem when we're actually dealing with something that we don't understand, and that's why getting ahead of this with this kind of plan is paramount. Thank you.
Chair Chapato, Commissioner Reynolds, we're absolutely in alignment with you. So we look forward to the additional discussions on that. I think we've got some things that hopefully you will find invigorating as we move forward as opportunities.
I'll bring the champagne.
So we're wrapping up here. OEM outside of a disaster, we really do focus a lot on updating and revising plans. We mentioned before, some of our plans are very dated, and while the dates on them were changed, the content did not, so we need to fix that. Unfortunately, one of the grants we applied for got turned down recently, so we're reevaluating how we can accomplish that with existing resources and maybe some additional support from this board. Conducting of exercises, we just implemented a 3-year exercise plan for the city of Las Cruces. We are looking at implementing the same plan for Doña Ana Community College, and then we've already started the discussions with County Manager Macias on being able to do the same thing for Doña Ana County. And this would actually focus for the first 3 years on that continuity of operations and being able to ensure that our county services will continue to our constituents no matter what. We may have to do them in a different location, we may have to go to paper, but we want to make sure that our county services are able to meet the needs of our constituents. While we're talking about that, something I neglected to mention earlier, but something that this board might be asked to do in a disaster declaration, just to kind of prime you thinking that direction. We may, in future disaster declarations, ask you to consider waiving fees for certain services in order to help the community. For example, something that we've seen from other parts of the country is waiving of building permit fees for reconstruction in the disaster zone. That's not money that the county was ever planning on getting before the disaster. It's not like we said, we got a 10% chance of a disaster this year, so we'll build 10% into the budget. No. So that eliminating those fees can really help the people at a time when they don't have access to cash and being able to do rebuilding, remodeling, and restoration of services. And that's a new discussion for us here, and we need to look at all of our county services and how we might be able to do a mobile office into a disaster zone, because people may not have that transportation to come up here to request things. And they may not have the access to online because their home where their computer is not accessible. So we're looking at how we can roll those services out into the disaster location with tablets, with internet, maybe even with staff from the various county offices to be able to make our services much more accessible to our community members.
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Reynolds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stephen, I think it's a good idea on a regular basis, not just a disaster basis, because as one of the complaints that I get more than anything else is I can't always get to the county while they're open, to do what I need to do. So I think it's something the board should consider normally for outreach services. But in a disaster, certainly we do have to have a plan to say, how do we relieve the burden, because FEMA doesn't cover those kind of expenses. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just going to be quiet.
Okay.
Continue, Mr. Lopez.
So some of the current projects that we've got going on right now is improving radio communication interoperability for first responders. OEM already made the move to the state radio system, so now we're working with the state, the Sheriff's Department, and the County Fire Department and Mesilla Valley Regional Dispatch on making that move now for the rest of the first responders. We're working on that modern emergency operations center. We're working on building and sustaining our volunteer network that can help in disasters, because no matter how many staff we have, volunteers really help us out a lot. We're looking at how we can now go into our next phase of our all hazards disaster shelter, and then again, ensuring those appropriate capabilities for disaster response. And then we mentioned plans. So there's our THIRA, it's the very first one listed there, that threats, hazards, identification, and risk analysis. Then there's our all hazards emergency operations plan, our tactical interoperations and communications plan, our integrated preparedness plan, our all hazards mitigation plan, our various emergency action plans for the flood control structures, our continuity of government plans, and all of those should be following this 5-step cycle where we plan, we then get the resources we need, we train with those resources, we do a full-scale exercise to make sure those resources work like we expected them to, we do an evaluation on that, and then we go back into the planning cycle again for anything else that didn't work the way we thought it would, make modifications or look at how we can take it to the next level. So we've got a lot of plans always in the works, and the staff support that this board has given us to be able to grow our operation now to 4 emergency management professionals really is helping us catch up on things that just never happened before that really needed to. So we do truly believe in continuous improvement, incident debriefings, post-incident critiques, corrective action plans, and then the feedback we get from people like yourselves. So by all means, never hesitate to give us feedback. That is very helpful in ensuring that we are meeting the needs of our community and communicating appropriately. So with that, if there are any other questions.
Chair.
Commissioner Shelter on this.
2 things. Well, many of things. One thing is that I have the most respect for you, Mr. Lopez, and you, Ms. Bowen, because what you do blows my mind. It is something that I am not familiar with. So I have the most respect for you guys, and being up here on this dais today and having this conversation just feels a little weird. I'm going to put that out there. I would rather be at a table learning about this stuff because it's something that I don't understand fully, and it's something that affects every single person. And I saw in your previous slide that you guys do post-incident critiques and analysis. And I have a feeling that a lot of this presentation probably came from our most recent, which was the La Union flood, because a lot of this stuff looks new and relevant and all that stuff, which is great. That is also something that I would love to see, is how that went down and what we can do to improve it through policy that we can implement. I have to say, your idea about waiving fees for building permits after a disaster such as that sounds like common sense. I'm really actually surprised we don't have anything like that. So those kind of things I would love for you all to bring to the board and say, here's our list, let's look at it in detail, and all of us sit down at the table and say, you know, this is something that we really need to focus on and look at. So that's something that I really think is going to be of a benefit to everyone here. And I have an email like ready to go for you, Mr. Lopez, of all my like little things. But I really do appreciate you guys being here today. I've learned so much. I wish I've learned, I'm sure that everyone here on this board probably appreciates you and what we've learned today. So I'm going to be quiet and just send my email.
Well,
Thank you.
To dovetail on that, I think this was so informative, and we really appreciate your passion for what you're doing. And I think it really brings to mind how much this office needs to be funded. And when we speak to our legislators, to make that of importance for us, because if we don't have an office that is running smoothly and more room, just in case we do have that natural disaster, then we're not going to be able to do what we need to do for our constituents. So commissioners, please get a hold of our legislators and really push this item. Another thing, I'd like to encourage the commissioners to email questions to Mr. Lopez, Mr. Gooden regarding the statutes, so that next time Mr. Lopez comes before us, he knows what our questions are. Thank you. Any other comments from the commissioners?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Sanchez?
I just want to echo the sentiments of the Vice Chair and Chair. I appreciate you coming and providing this information and the training. It's nice to see, like I said, the lessons learned, where we're going, to see the vision of where we are now, where we want to go. And I think if we can continue to develop that here, it'd be great. I dare say that I would love to see this even from some of the other, you know, from across the county on some of these plans and how we can continue to grow. Because I think, like I said, I think for the board, for us to be able to see what it is, where we're going, how it affects our constituents, and how we can support that, I think is a huge piece of how, you know, we can continue to grow as a county. So I truly appreciate everything you've done, everything you've done over the past few years between COVID, La Union. I mean, God, there's been so many, you know, just even the smaller incidents. I'm truly appreciative to you, to Amanda, and the rest of the office, and all the efforts you do at the OEM. So thank you, Mr. Lopez.
Great job.
Thank you. Madam Chair?
Commissioner Reynolds?
Yeah, I second what Commissioner Sanchez said. You've done a lot of great things for us in the last few years, and thank you for that. Certainly got us through COVID and got us through some things, and we appreciate it. This is long overdue, doing this, taking this process. I have been with other organizations, and we struggle to do the same thing. The plan you put together is very comprehensive, which is refreshing. It also is going to require that we invest both time, money, and attention to make sure that this is good for our county, and we're leading, and I thank you for that. The thing I think we have to remember as a board is that disasters, by definition, are really hard to plan for. And secondly, if we don't try to anticipate and be somewhat prepared and expect them and get caught flat-footed, more people are hurt, more damage is done, and the recovery takes much longer. So for that, I think we have to focus on this and take the time necessary to be as prepared as possible and to anticipate what we can with the weather changing, you know, with the globe changing, with politics changing. You know, we have a lot to think about, and I echo what Commissioner Shalzo Hernandez said about if we have a school shooting, you know, we need to know who's going to get there. And I think, and you have been in my meeting at MERV, the board, and one of the reasons we're actually, and I'm pushing very hard to get this communications across all of the organizations is because if we have a school shooting, everybody shows up. Everybody, every organization, every mother, father, daughter, cousins, sheriff, fire, ambulance, hospital, everybody shows up. We need to have control of the situation in order to prevent it from turning into a Uvalde. And that's why this is so paramount, that we do this right. We do it right the first time, and we continue to modify it and be flexible enough to try to understand the risk in every facet that we can come up with. And this is not simple. And so you're taking on a monumental task, and we understand it, we recognize it, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Reynolds. Any other comments from the commission? Good job, Mr. Lopez. Great presentation. We appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the commission. And again, none of what we're talking about here is secret. So if you have any community meetings that you would like us to show up at and talk with your constituents, we're happy to do so. So thank you very much. And again, forewarning, we are going to be reaching out to you for help.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. We'll now move on to correspondence. Amanda, do we have any correspondence?
Yes. Juan Carlos Villalobos Macias versus Doña Ana County, Arthur Mustinsky versus Doña Ana County, the state of Joaquin Delgado versus Doña Ana County.
Thank you. And if the commissioners have nothing more to say, we are adjourned. Anything else to say, commissioners? Any other comments? Thank you. Oh, Commissioner Reynolds.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Did you bring any chocolate for us, Commissioner?
I did not. I brought my card from my wife, but I didn't bring any chocolate, sorry.
Thank you. Then we are adjourned at 11:13.